Hi, First Assembly. This is Tunisha Hubbard, and today I'm covering Wednesday Word for our lead pastor, Pastor Wes Johnson. Today we're going to springboard from a question Jesus asked a crowd from Luke chapter 12, verses 54 through 56. It says, "Then he said to the crowd, when you see a cloud rise out of the west, immediately you say, a shower is coming, and it is so. And when the south wind blows, you say, there will be heat, and it happens. You hypocrites, you discern the face of the sky and of the earth, but why do you not know how to discern this time?" So today we're going to talk about one of the essential aspects for discerning, which is to watch. We have a lot to cover, so let's go. All right, so today we're going to look at the passages. It's going to cover from Luke chapter 12, verse 1, all the way through Luke 13, verse 9. For the sake of time, we're going to hop around a little bit, so we're not going to go through all of it. You can, of course, join us on Wednesday nights. We're going to expound on this a little bit more when we're in person. But Luke chapter 12, verse 1. Jesus is addressing a crowd, and the way Luke organizes this passage, this entire discourse, right, from Luke 12:1 all the way to Luke 13:9, looks like he's addressing the exact same crowd all at one time. So the very first thing we see, Jesus says, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Now, when we're talking about look, this idea of anytime Jesus says beware, anytime he says look out for, take heed, these are what's going to key us into something that we need to be watching for, because in order for us to analyze something, in order for us to discern something, we have to have this observational ability. So first of all, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees. Now, we're going to talk going to go into a little bit of discussions about yeast and hypocrisy. So yeast is a rising agent. Most people know that we use yeast in bread. And the thing about yeast is it is difficult to detect. When you initially put yeast into something, the only reason you typically know is because you did it. So if someone slipped some yeast into your food, you wouldn't know initially, but eventually you will see the results of it, right? So it comes. So when Jesus is talking about yeast, he's talking about something that when it initially gets in, you don't necessarily know it's there. So you've got to really be paying attention to see. And then hypocrisy. Now, we all know what hypocrisy is. I say one thing and I behave another way. One scholar, however, Joel Green, who writes for the New International Commentary on the New Testament, suggests that the Greek words transliterated for hypocrisy here actually means godlessness. And when we go back to Luke chapter 11, right at the end, we see Jesus is addressing the Pharisees and the teachers. Some other translations say some lawyers. They were criticizing him for not, going through the ritual washing before he sat down to eat with them. And so he pointed out to them that they're very focused on what's on the outside, but the inside is corrupted, and they don't see that. He says something similar to the teachers. He says, you have the keys to the door of knowledge, and you don't go in. But not only do you not go in, you don't let anyone else go in. And so this idea, which is also called hypocrisy in Luke chapter 11, is not necessarily something that they're super aware of. It's their behavior presents itself as godliness. Meanwhile, there's another aspect that God cares about that they don't recognize as important. So the inside of the cup, which they don't realize, because Jesus did ask, do you not know that God also cares about the inside? So this idea of hypocrisy that we're going to be looking for is when something is going on and we don't even necessarily realize there's a different side of it that we're missing. So we got to watch, right? So we're going to watch. And for this part, we're going to call it watch your blind spot. So if you're going to discern, you got to pay attention to what's going on in those little tiny spaces where you don't normally see. We go forward a little bit, and then we can see in chapter 12, verses 4 and 5, Jesus implores the crowd about fear. He says, why are you afraid of the people who can only kill your body and they can do nothing more? Meanwhile, there is someone, and of course he's referring to God the Father, who can kill your body and can cast you into hell. So again, we're seeing this duality. There is the body, there is what we can see, right? What's obvious, what's on the outside that we can easily pay attention to. But what about the other side of that we are not seeing? What is going on in the blind spot where you can't see, right? Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees. These things that can sneak in that you don't necessarily see. Then we move on to the next section. So now we're going to get to about verse 15. Jesus is just talking about, watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees. Someone in the crowd says, "Hey, Jesus, my brother got all this inheritance and he won't share with me. Will you tell him to?" So Jesus says, "Who made me the authority over inheritances?" But then he says in verse 15, "Take heed and beware." So take heed, beware again of covetousness. For a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And so for this section, we're going to say, watch what you value. Jesus goes on to talk about the parable of a rich man, right? This rich man, his crops are abundant. He gets a windfall. And so he's trying to figure out, what do I do with all this stuff? He builds bigger barns. He stores everything up. And then in verse 19, it says, so the rich man says, "And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take rest, eat, drink, and be merry." But then the man dies that night. And then what happens to all of his goods? Nothing. But then what happens to his soul, right? And this is the implication here. He's focused on these things, right? These things that we can see, the possessions that we can value. And he did not invest in the kingdom of God. He did not invest in his relationship with the Lord. So he's now going into this afterlife situation again. And before, Jesus already talked about this. The soul dies, then there's what happens after that. Now, he cared about up until what he can see, which was my possessions, my riches. And then he did not look beyond that. He did not value anything beyond his possessions. So we have to watch what we value. How would you know what you value? If you were wondering about what it is that I value, an easy way to figure it out is pay attention. Pay attention to what are you giving your energies to? What are you giving your time to? What are you giving your resources to? What are the things that you are investing your abilities in? Those are the things that you value. And if those things aren't in the kingdom, if those things aren't beyond the kingdom, you really got to start paying attention, right? You got to start discerning what is going on and which direction are you going in, because that is where, your heart is. Your heart is wherever you have stored up your treasures. We move on just a little bit further. And now we're in Luke, about verse 49. And Jesus says, "Do you suppose that I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, rather division." And in this section, I'd say we need to watch our assumptions. And this one is a challenge because Jesus is the Prince of Peace. I mean, many of us who've grown up in church, we know that. And of course, we believe that if Jesus is around, there's all this peace, there's all this wonderfulness. But then Jesus is saying something else, right? Because what he's telling us here is when we assume that something is some way, then we are not paying attention to the other aspects of it. Again, Jesus said, we find this in John 14:6. Jesus says that I am the way, the truth, and the life. Truth and the way and life is a separator, because once truth comes in, lie has to go somewhere else, right? And if you have those two things together, it's very difficult to find peace in things that are so opposite. So again, when Jesus is around, if we think that everything has to be peaceful because Jesus is there, we have to pay attention to where are those assumptions coming from. And then if you don't know, if you don't agree, if you don't believe, get into the word, because that's where all of the information that we need, that's where it is. Go into the word and see what Jesus says about himself if you don't know. If you get into a situation and you're looking at it, you're trying to figure it out, I promise you, it's in the word. get in the word and find it out for yourself. And you have to do this for yourself. This is what Jesus is talking about. We have to be able to do this for ourselves. And then we get now right back to the original question, right? Jesus says, you hypocrites, why can't you discern? And here's the thing about the weather. Many of us can discern the weather. If we walk outside, you see a dark cloud, we go, oh, it's going to rain. And you got some options. You go back inside, you get an umbrella, you get your raincoat, or you say, okay, I'll take my chances and I'll get wet. But how did we learn how to do that? I don't believe that we did that in one shot. Nobody walked outside one time and said, oh, dark cloud, it was dark, I got wet, therefore, that is what must always be true. No, we learned this over time by experience, by observing continually, right? You went outside, it was dark. If you had never seen that before, you'll be like, wow. And then you get wet, you'll be like, oh, interesting. The next time it happens again, then it would start to click in your mind, wait a second, there is a connection between dark clouds and rain. Most of us have learned about this from our parents. Our parents tell us it's dark outside, get your raincoat, get your umbrella. And then we learn, we observe, we pay attention. And this is exactly what Jesus is saying. If you can do that with the weather, then you can do that with spiritual matters. You can pay attention. You can figure it out if you want to, if you put in the work, if you pay attention, if you look at these signs, if you look at these things, if you watch your assumptions. What is it that you are assuming? What is going on in your blind spot? What things are infiltrating your life that are leading you astray, that can lead you astray? Are you paying attention? What is it that you value? We've got to pay attention, because this is how you discern. First thing we've got to do is pay attention. Then Jesus talks now. After he asked this question, he goes on to say, okay, so you're on your way to the judge and your accuser is going with you. He says, why won't you judge for yourself what is the right thing to do? Isn't it better to settle with your accuser before you get to the judge? Because you get to the judge is going to throw you in jail, and then you're going to stay there for a very long time. And we can see a correlation here between going from life into eternity, right? We are on a path. And while we're on that path, while we have the opportunity to fix things, to figure out what is going on, to work out our salvation, then we ought to do it, because there could come a time when it is too late. And again, with the man who's storing up his riches, we don't determine that time. And we can assume that we know when that time is. We can assume that Jesus has delayed in coming, and that means it's not going to happen in my lifetime. But the truth is, we do not know. So we need to discern and make those decisions. We need to make allowances for the things that we may or may not know. Look at it, pay attention, focus, put in the work to figure out what is going on and make those decisions to change our path. Now, Jesus closes this entire section with the parable of the fruitless fig tree. He talks about, so this owner comes out, he observes the fig tree, he says, this tree has been here for 3 years and has never grown any fruit. It's just taking up my soil. It is using up the resources. Just uproot it, throw it out. And then the gardener says, no. Let me work on it. Let me, he says, aggravate the soil, right? So he's going to dig up the soil, aerate it, allow some air to get in. He's going to water it. He's going to tend to it. He said, give it another year and let us see what happens. And I think this is the hope of this story. For all of us, I believe all of us have had a moment when we are that fruitless fig tree. But then there's a gardener who is interceding on our behalf, who is saying, hold on a minute. Let's wait. Tunisha's going to get it. I'm going to aggravate the soil, and the roots are going to catch, and she's going to start bearing some fruit. He's saying that about all of us, about Michael and John and Shauna, right? Just hang in there. right? Let's get the roots going. Let's start bearing fruit. Let's start paying attention to what is going on and get ourselves moving. Because the idea of this message is not for us to feel condemned, but to understand that there are ways to discern what we need to know. We just have to start putting in that work. And then once we put in that work, then we can help others. Once we can discern the times, we can start showing others. Just like we learn about the weather, and we don't just let people go outside without an umbrella when we know that it's gonna rain. We say, hey, come on, it's gonna rain. Get your umbrella, get your raincoat. That's what we need to do. We need to figure that out. We need to learn that for ourselves. And then we also need to bring in our neighbors, bring in our friends, bring in our communities, help everyone to understand the times that we're living in and what we need to be doing to make sure that when we come to the end of our life and we stand before the Lord, that we know that we have done what he has asked us to do. We know that we have done what he has required, what he has called us to do, because we have taken the time to observe and then to work. And remember, no matter what is going on, God is always on our side, always on our side. We always have that gardener saying, one more chance, give her one more chance, give him one more chance, give him one more season, one more opportunity, because we can do this. We can grow, we can be fruitful. So with that, I just want to encourage us. We've got to watch. Let us keep watch. If you're able to come on out and join us in our sanctuary here at 700 Braddock Road, come on out, fellowship with us, and just let's grow, let's watch, let's be fruitful together. As you go through the day, make sure you're watching, and then watch for someone who needs Jesus, and don't forget to tell them Jesus loves them.